Good day, everyone. Today we will be discussing about the next chapter, which is about assessment of learning, chapter 6, with the following topics containing determining the nature of assessment, second, preparing for assessment, writing good test items, creating and using rubrics, and of course, preparing a learning portfolio. Now, before we begin discussing determining the nature of assessment, let us first discuss the following objectives that will guide us in understanding the purposes, principles, and approaches in assessing students' learning. Specifically, the objectives are: first, distinguish the purposes of assessment; second, explain and evaluate the guiding principles of assessment; and compare the basic approaches in educational assessment. Now, when you hear the word assessment, we hear or we think of so many definitions that we can associate with the term assessment. However, according to Rees and Walker in 2003, assessment measures how effectively the students learned, usually against stated learning outcomes. So the results of the various forms of assessment is used or are used to quantify judgments on the learner's academic performance. Next, according to the BECEd Order number 55, series of 2016, it is or the assessment is the process of measuring learners' attainment of learning skills as well as the 21st century skills. So, as we read the definitions of assessment, we can infer that there are really several purposes why teachers assess their students' performance. So it might be because we want to motivate them, or we want to create learning opportunities, provide grades and feedback, or even ensuring quality assurance. So the assessment of data will be utilized to reach educational decisions. So that is why we conduct assessments. Now, for determining the nature of assessment, we have three basic but essential questions in developing and using assessment according to the Educational Testing Service in 2003. So, first, as what you can see on screen, we have the question: what am I trying to find out about my students' learning? What learning goals or outcomes do I want to measure? 'Di ba? So it's very specific on what we are really trying to measure when we use assessment. Then we also have the second question: what kind of evidence do I need to measure or to know about my students' learning? What learning goals do I want to measure? Of course, we need to have some kind of concrete evidence in order to support our findings, in order to support the goals or the outcomes that we want our students to achieve. And third, what kind of assessment will give me that evidence or that outcome, 'di ba? So we really need to have a concrete plan when we do our assessments. Next are the six principles that guide assessment according to Gutierrez in 2007. So, according to him, we should address learning targets or curriculum goals, provide efficient feedback on instructions, use a variety of assessment procedures, ensure that the assessment is valid, fair. Next is keep a record of the assessment, then interpret and communicate the results meaningfully. So those are very understandable. Now, according to the book, our FS book, we have two basic approaches in interpreting assessment results. So, first, we have the norm reference assessment, which measures the student's performance compared with the rest of those students who were given a specific task. So, it gives the student in this reference assessment, in the norm reference assessment, it gives the student a relative status compared to other students. So an example would be Sean Xavier is at the top is at the top one of the class. So this example shows that Sean Xavier's standing compared to other students in the class. So he is very this example is very specific that Sean Xavier is the top one of the class. So he is being compared to the rest of the class. However, if we go to the second approach in interpreting assessment results, we have the criterion reference assessment, which measures the student's condition based on a certain criteria. So an example would be Sean Xavier can recite the poem, diba? Clearly, properly, and all that. All of those verbs, all of those adjectives, anything that could describe whatever Sean Xavier can do and cannot do. So again, the criterion reference assessment depicts what a student can and cannot do. So for this example, it shows that Sean Xavier can perform the given task without comparing his performance with the other students. Next up, we have preparing for assessment. So this lesson will guide you in understanding the preliminary preparations in assessing students' learning. Specifically, the objectives of this lesson are the following. First, discuss the importance of table of specifications, create a table of specifications for one grading period, and of course, critique a table of specification. So when we prepare for assessment, we think of the word preparation. So according to Benjamin Franklin, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail, which is true because as a teacher, it is not enough that we just do things one day before, a week before, but we need ample time to prepare everything in order to ensure that the learning outcomes or our lesson, our instructional materials are really aligned with what we want our students to achieve according to the standards that our like example for BECEd, like the curriculum guide, whatever the standards there, it should be met by us. So we should be creative. We should be time or responsible of our time in order for us to prepare those materials wholeheartedly. So we can say that assessment is not just simply judging, grading, and reporting of student performance, but it is a very time gauging tasks wherein we really need to put all our efforts and our dedication in order for us to really align everything and to put everything into place. So here is a sample one-way table of specifications wherein you can see the different objectives that we can find based on the following DepEd curriculum standards. Here we have the subject English because it is referring to the topic noun. So we have the objectives, the number of recitation days, the number of test items, the percentage of the items, and of course, the item placement. So if we are to refer this to our specific test paper, we must know how everything is placed according to our Bloom's taxonomy. So we should know whether that question is targeting a specific knowledge, if that question is aiming to test the learner's creating skills or evaluating skills, and how many of those items are in our specific assessment in order for us to really know and balance out the number of items in our tests. So it is really a must that this should not be taken lightly. It should not be made a day or an hour before, but it should be given ample amount of time in order for us to really critically assess whether our test items, our a percentage are balanced and really aligned with what we want our students to achieve.
Greetings everyone, my name is Byron Jancen o Fernandez and I will be discussing Lesson 3, Writing a Good Test Items. Before we start our discussion, these are our objectives for this lesson. This lesson will guide you in understanding how to properly and correctly construct good test items. Specifically, the objectives of this lesson are the following. First is to determine select type from supply type. Second, evaluate the select and supply type in a test. And thirdly, construct good select and supply test items. The way a teacher constructs test items can significantly impact students' ability to demonstrate their understanding. Poorly designed test items such as those with ambiguous wording, unclear instructions, or overly complex structures may confuse our students and prevent them from answering correctly even if they know the material. To address this, us teachers should not just master content and pedagogy. We also need to master and develop our strong assessment designing skills. This includes crafting clear, fair, and valid test items that align with learning objectives, minimize bias, and accurately measures students' knowledge and skills. Gutierrez in 2007 pointed out 10 general rules that the teacher should consider in writing any type of test items. Let's go through these rules together so we can learn how to create better test items. As future teachers, we need to ensure that our tests are clear, fair, and effective in measuring what our students have learned. The first rule tells us that we must match the desired learning outcome or competency. Every question we write must align with the specific learning objectives that we have set for our lessons. For example, if the objective is to test students' ability to add fractions, we shouldn't ask a question about multiplying them. Let's always assess ourselves. Does this question measure the skill or knowledge we're teaching? We need to consider that. Second rule tells us that each test item should have one correct or best answer. Each test item should have only one answer that experts agree is correct. We should avoid creating questions where the answer could be debated. For example, asking why is honesty important might lead to many valid opinions. Questions like that are better for class discussions, not tests. The third rule tells us to use simple, clear language. We need to use language that's appropriate for our students' level. If the question is confusing, students might struggle not because they don't know the answer, but because they don't understand the question. Let us focus on clarity and avoid unnecessary complexity and jargons. The fourth rule tells us to present a clear task. Every question should clearly state what we expect students to do. For example, instead of saying explain photosynthesis, we could say in 2 sentences explain how plants convert sunlight into energy during photosynthesis. Being specific helps students know exactly what's required. The fifth rule tells us to follow rules of grammar. Proper grammar, punctuation, and capitalization are essential. If we don't follow these rules, our questions might confuse students or reflect poorly on us as professionals. For example, instead of what is the main reason for global warming, we should write what is the main reason for global warming. The sixth rule tells us to group items of the same type together. To make the test easier for students to navigate, we should organize it by question type. For example, all the multiple choice questions should come first, followed by all the true or false items, and so on. This avoids unnecessary switching between formats, which can disrupt their focus. The seventh rule tells us to start with easy questions. Let us arrange our test items from easiest to most difficult. Starting with easy questions helps students build confidence as they go. If we begin with hardest items, it might discourage them and impact their performance on the rest of the tests. The eighth rule tells us to prepare extra questions. It's a good idea to write more questions than we plan to use. This gives us flexibility to replace any items that don't work well during the review process. It's always better to have extra questions ready than to realize that we need more at the last minute. The ninth rule tells us to make a scoring key. We should prepare a scoring key before giving the test. This helps us ensure that grading is consistent and avoids giving away patterns in the answers. A key also helps us spot questions that might need revision. The last and the 10th rule tells us to prepare and review test items in advance. Let us plan ahead. As teachers, writing and reviewing our test items early gives us time to refine the test questions. We even asked our peer to review our tests for clarity and fairness. A well-prepared test not only reduces stress for us, but also makes it more effective for our students. Those are the 10 general rules that teachers should consider when writing any type of test items. If we anchor our test items on these rules, we'll create tests that are fair, clear, and aligned with what we are teaching. Let us remember that a good test isn't just a way to grade, it's a tool to help our students show what they have learned. Two basic types of test items. There are actually two basic types of test items. These are the select type and the supply type. First, let us talk about the select type. This type of test item presents several possible answers, and students are required to choose the correct or best one. One of the advantages of select type items is that they tend to be easier for students to answer because they don't have to come up with the information on their own. Instead, they can focus on identifying the answer from the options given. Common examples of select type includes multiple choice questions, matching type questions, and true or false questions. These formats can help assess a range of knowledge efficiently. Now let us move on to the supply type. Unlike the select type, supply type item requires students to generate their own answers. This means that they have to provide the correct word, phrase, or even a complete sentence in response to a question. This type can be more challenging because it tests not only their knowledge but also their ability to articulate. Example, supply type items include short answer questions and essay prompts. These formats allow students to express their understanding in a more open-ended way. Understanding the difference between these two types of test items is key for us as future educators. By choosing the appropriate type for our assessments, we can better evaluate our students' knowledge and skills and ensure that our tests are both effective and fair. Lastly are the 7 general rules in writing test items according to Gonzalez in 2007. First, we need to ensure that the test items matches the desired learning outcome or competency. This means that every question we write should directly measure what we want our students to learn. For instance, if our objective is to assess students' understanding of a specific concept, the question must reflect that understanding accurately. It's essential to ask ourselves, does this question align with the skills we have taught? Next, there should be only one correct or best answer. Each test item must have a clear answer that experts agree on. We want to avoid questions that could lead to debate or multiple interpretations. For example, instead of asking a question that could have several valid responses, we should focus on questions that have a definitive answer. This clarity helps prevent confusion and ensure that we can accurately assess students' understanding. Lastly are the 7 general rules in writing test items according to Gonzalez in 2007. First, we need to ensure that the test items matches the desired learning outcome or competency. This means that every question we write should directly measure what we want our students to learn. For instance, if our objective is to assess students' understanding of a specific concept, the question must reflect that understanding accurately. It's essential to ask ourselves, does this question align with the skills we have taught? Next, there should be only one correct or best answer. Each test item must have a clear answer that experts agree on. We want to avoid questions that could lead to debate or multiple interpretations. For example, instead of asking a question that could have several valid responses, we should focus on questions that have a definitive answer. This clarity helps prevent confusion and ensure that we can accurately assess students' understanding. Moving on, the language used in all of the items should be simple, clear, and definite. It's important to use vocabulary that is appropriate for our students' level. If a question is too complex or uses jargons that students might not understand, it can lead to misunderstandings of the lesson or the question. Our goal is to communicate clearly so that students can focus on demonstrating their knowledge rather than deciphering the language of the question. In addition, the test items should present a clear and definite task. Each question must specify exactly what we want students to do. Ambiguous terms can confuse students, so it's crucial to be specific. For example, instead of saying discuss photosynthesis, we might ask, in 2 sentences, explain how plants use sunlight in photosynthesis. This way, students know exactly what's expected of them. Fifth important rule is that the test items should follow acceptable rules of grammar. This includes correct usage of capitalization, punctuation, and ensuring subject-verb agreement. If our questions contain grammatical errors, it can lead to confusion and may reflect poorly on our professionalism. For instance, instead of asking what is the capital of France, we should write what is the capital of France properly. Proper grammar helps maintain clarity and credibility. Furthermore, all items of the same type should be grouped together. This organization helps students to navigate the test more easily. For example, if we have multiple choice questions, we should present all of them together, followed by true or false items. This arrangement minimizes the need for students to switch between different formats, which can disrupt their focus and flow. Finally, the test items should be arranged from the easiest to the most difficult. Starting with easier questions can help build students' confidence as they progress through the test. If students encounter challenging questions right away, it might discourage them and negatively affect their performance on the rest of the test. By leading them with easier items, we encourage a positive testing experience for our students. Now that ends my discussion about Lesson 3, Writing Good Test Items. I hope I have made my discussion comprehensive and that my input was well understood by everyone. This has been Byron, Jancen, or Fernandez. Thank you for listening.
All right, so we are now down to the two last topics, and now we will be discussing about creating and using rubrics. So, for the lesson objectives, this lesson will guide you in understanding the purpose of using and constructing rubrics for a certain activity. Specifically, the objectives of these lessons are the following: explain the purpose of using rubrics, evaluate a sample scoring rubrics, and create and use a rubrics for a particular class activity. All right, so before we tackle the using and creating rubrics, we all know, as future educators as we are, that there is a shift from the paper and pencil test to authentic skills assessment. And when we talk about authentic assessment, it refers to the application of real world tasks performed by the students inside the classroom. So authentic skills assessment refer to how these skills can actually perform beyond paper and pencil tests, and this requires their skills. And this particular shift in assessment is already integrated into the performance tasks as emphasized in Depth Order 8 series of 2015. So this makes us educators to show what we know and what we can do in diverse ways. So this it requires teachers to be flexible enough in planning how to apply these authentic assessments in the classroom. All right. So in relation to the Depth Ed Order 8 series of 2015, this is how authentic assessments are being graded. So for the components, we have written works for languages such as Aralpan and ESP, Filipino and English, we have 30%. For science and math, we have 40%. For the MAPE, EBP and TLE, we have 20%. And for the performance tasks, we have for languages, AP and ESP 50%, science and math 40%, MAPE, EPP and TLE 60%, and for the quarterly assessment, we have for languages, AP and ESP 20%, science and math 20%, MAPE, EPP and TLE, we have 20%. So we have to take note of these components in order for us to really no, and this serves as the basis on how to grade or score our students fairly and of course in a meaningful manner. Okay, so rubrics, as defined by the Center of Innovation in Research and Teaching, these are grading tools that provide a systematic method for scoring students based on detailed performance standards, meaning to say, this serves as a method on how teachers should score the students based on how the students are performing of the tasks that are given to them. So these are most commonly used to grade presentations, papers, portfolios, speeches, and projects where the assessment may otherwise be subjective. Okay, so the primary purpose of the rubric is to standardize the grading and provide more consistent grading. So as I have said earlier, that through using rubrics, this allows teachers to grade the students in a meaningful manner and of course to avoid bias, and this will provide a more consistent grading for the students. All right, so Gutierrez actually outlined the steps in developing a scoring rubric. So we actually have three. First, identify the qualities that will look into a student's output. So what are the qualities that should be seen? Are these outputs are actually performed by the students? Define the criteria from the top to the bottom level of performance. It should start from the highest to lowest. Let's say, for example, 4 as the highest, 1 as the lowest, and lastly, assign a numerical value to each level of performance. Of course, from 4 to 1, from very good to needs improvement. So I will provide an example how to create a rubric. All right. So as I have said earlier, from the components and how to create a rubric, we should have the components and how these students are graded. So we have content, organization, and mechanics. And for knowing the highest to lowest, we have very good, good, fair, or and needs improvement, and of course assigning numerical value, 4 as the highest, 1 as the lowest. So from the components, we are also defining the students what are the things that should be seen in the student's performance. Let's say, for example, in the content part, very good if the content is knowledgeable, substantive, development of ideas relevant to assigned topic. So for the good, sure knowledge of subject, but ideas are limited, most relevant to topic, but lacks detail. So it still needs improvement, but still it gets a good point. And for the fair, we have two: limited knowledge of subject, little substance, inadequate development of topic. So it really needs further improvement. And for the last, it really needs a lot of improvement, does not show knowledge of subject, meaning to say it is far out, it is off the topic, and it is not relevant to the assigned topic. So this sample rubric will actually guide you on how to use your own rubric, but of course, we also need to be mindful enough of the components and how to grade our students. Okay. All right. So we are now down to the last topic. It is the preparing a learning portfolio. Okay, so for preparing a learning portfolio, the learning objectives of this lesson will guide students in understanding the importance of assessing students' learning through preparing a portfolio. Specifically, the objectives of this lesson are the following: explain the use of a learning portfolio, determine the purposes of developing learning portfolios, and prepare a field study portfolio. All right. So earlier in creating and using rubrics, it is also one of the shift of the paper and pencil test, but refers to the performance test. But now we will be using portfolio in assessing students' learning. So we'll see how these students can actually perform using the portfolio. All right, so portfolio, as defined by Hart, 1994, is a container that holds evidence of an individual's skills, ideas, interests, and accomplishments. So, Gutierrez also supported this idea by Hart, which defined portfolio as a collection of student work that has been selected and organized to show learning progress. It is a developmental portfolio or to show sample of best a student's best work showcase portfolio. So it's I in order for students to show their skills in making a portfolio, it's either through developmental portfolio where these students can show their learning progress. Like say for example, in the first semester, students will um, put in the portfolios all the tests and exams that are being administered by the teacher at the end of the semester. They will pass it to the teacher and how much progress they are making. Or for the showcase portfolio, the students are showing the one of the best works to the teacher. So this is actually not the scrapbook, but a purposeful collection of anything worth considering, meaning to say that these are actually students works either their progress or one of their best works. All right, so what is the aim in using a portfolio? So the aim of using a portfolio is to develop independent and self-directed learners. Of course, in a learner-centered classroom, we have to take note that these students should also have the autonomy on how to make progress for themselves, and of course, to learn in a meaningful manner that they are doing the best that they can to showcase their skills, of course, through the use of portfolio. So long-term portfolios provide a more accurate picture of students' specific achievements and progress and the areas that need attention. Because through learning a portfolio and how these students pass their portfolios, other showcase or developmental portfolios, teachers can actually see what are the students' strengths, and of course the weaknesses. So Winner, as cited in Mitchell 1992, outlined 35 purposes of using a portfolio in assessing students' learning and progress, although we will only highlight on preparing a learning portfolio as a teaching and assessment tool. Though there are actually um lots of purposes and how to grade students using a portfolio, but now we will only highlight on how these students prepare learning portfolio as a teaching and assessment tool. All right, so we actually have several on how to assess students and in using portfolio. So to provide students ownership, motivation, a sense of accomplishment, and participation. Of course, as teachers as we are, we don't want our teachers to be demotivated in performing in school. Of course, in through learning portfolio, these students can show their skills. To involve students in a process of self-evaluation. Of course, through self-evaluation, students will know that they are actually belong to the learning, teaching and learning process. To help students and teachers set goals through the two-way process, teachers and students will know how to meet halfway. Okay. So to build in time for reflection about students' accomplishments, because as teachers will give reflection to the students' skills and performance, these students can actually know the part where to enhance and develop more. The individualized writing instruction to provide more reasons or opportunities to write because students are already motivated to do more. To set up an apprenticeship situation because in this way, students are applying a real world situation when they can actually apply this for the future endeavor. And last, also to connect reading, writing, and thinking. So these are some of the skills that also need to be used in a one setting in order for teachers and of course for students to apply critical and analytical thinking skills. Okay, so we also have to serve as an alternative to standardized testing. So aside from paper and pencil tests, we also go over with an alternative assessment, which is through a performance test using portfolio to serve as a college application placement vehicle, of course. These are some of the trainings that students need to have the knowledge and how to apply for the future endeavor. To replace competency exams, these are objective exams to serve as a grade or end year of culminating activity that students and teachers will also serve as a core memory because these are some of the best outputs of the students. To provide program evaluation, of course, and lastly, to serve as a vehicle for changing the school's conversation with the public. So it is not just dealing with how students can do inside the classroom, but of course, what students can do inside and outside the classroom.